we are sort of forming a new theory, and we begin by asking what is a physical law. So it's a statement of nature which every experiment must arrive at. And these statements have been written, they will, for particular purpose, it will follow. So experiments done in different frames must yield the same result. It describes the physical result, and the last statement is that it is dynamic in nature. So you could ask that once you say it's a statement of nature, so then it's a truth. So to say, why should truth be a function of time? And that is because the laws, the experiment is the final arbiter, and laws are formulated with observations, and they depend on the accuracy of the instruments. So advancement of technology, it leads to better instrumentation, and laws that remain true gain in stature, those which don't must be abandoned. And we will cover this domain of a physical law or this thing towards the end of the course, as to when you have probably in lecture you were told of special relativity, and it is true that as the speed of light becomes much less than c, you have the Newtonian mechanics. So we will talk of when quantum mechanics becomes classical physics and when there is no, it does not. So that's why it has been put. So let me begin by saying that some history that classical mechanics formulated by these big people remain unaltered for 3 centuries, and experimental observations could not be but then there were certain experimental observations which could not be explained on the basis of classical physics. And one by one these perplexing questions were answered in a very short interval of time. And when I first started teaching, I went into a little history of quantum physics, and the remarkable thing was that in a very short history of time between 1920 and 1930, most of it was ready as we do it today or know it. And what is new about it is that it is subjective probability, and we leave the path of objective determinism. So you might question at this stage that just in the previous transparency, I said that a physical law is a truth of nature, and if it becomes subjective probability, then you are talking of reference frame dependent or it is dependent on who is taking an observation. So what quantum mechanics, there is a misconception that nothing is certain. That is not true. We will hopefully by the end of the 5 lectures that have been given, we will be able to what to derive or what is determinism in this subjective probability is what would be the aim. So what were the perplexing observations? The light exhibits interference as well as photoelectric effect, the Bohr model of atom, and black body radiation. So today I would like to, by doing some thought experiments, explain how all these observations were explained without going into any mathematics. We start writing mathematics from the next lecture. And also give you a motivation as to why Professor Mukunda did use the mathematics that he already has done in last week, or in this week, or whole of this week. So some history, this is what is given in most of the textbook. Beginning of the last century, there were 2 entities, matter and radiation. Matter was described by Newton's laws, and radiation by Maxwell's equation. So, and the radiation, the matter is localized, or you can in space, and the radiation is spread. It was thought we understood it all. The first jolt came with the radiation emitted by a black body. So what is this was the spectrum. This is the intensity plotted as a function of wavelength, and these are curves at various temperature. And there were 3 observations. One was that the maximum, which is over here for 3000 K, 4000 or 5000 times the temperature, is a constant. And then there was this was known as the Wien's displacement law. This is the Stephen's law, that the total power, if you integrate this, is proportional to T to the power of 4. And then there was the classical theory, which gave the Rayleigh-Jeans law, and which agreed well at higher wavelengths, but as you went to shorter wavelength, the black body, according to this, should have emitted infinite energy, and this was called the ultraviolet spectroscopy. So, what is a black body? You must be teaching this. It's a closed evacuated container with a small. One way to view it is this, so that all the radiation, gets limited inside it. At high temperature, visible light emerges. The cavity contains radiant energy, which is in thermal equilibrium with the cavity walls. And at a given temperature, this is the definition. But what is important for our point of view, or what I am going to say next, is that it is independent of the shape, size, material of the evacuated container. So it is independent of all the physical characteristics of the body, of a body, and therefore the radiation that is coming out must contain physics. And that is what that this part is independent of any reference frame. So this was what was. Why is it a physical phenomena? For this reason. And at a more basic level, why should there be three laws which apparently had no connection with each other describe one physical phenomena? So Planck solved the mystery by enunciating that it emitted radiation in quantas of h nu. There is a paper also which was shown long time this thing, that the only way in which you could explain this was by quantizing radiation, or only mathematically also. So once this was given, enter Einstein, and he said if radiation is emitted in quantas, they should also be absorbed in quantas, and he could explain the photoelectric effect using this. So if light is absorbed in quantas and it is emitted in quantas, then it must contain quantas. And then this point also is not stressed so much in the books, but just have been kept, the quantum effect. And this was, what was it? That you have a photon which comes in, it gets scattered by the electron, and the wavelength change he could compute, and it agreed very well. So what was importance was that he treated this as a collision of two particles, and he conserved the energy and momentum simultaneously. So this needs a little mention when you teach, that this is the difference from the photoelectric effect, where we go down just the energy conservation. What about phenomena of interference and diffraction? So this we will talk of the logical ditrope of Feynman. Light behaves sometimes as particles and sometimes as waves. So this is this thing that entered de Broglie, and he said if radiation behaves sometimes as particles, sometimes as wave, what about matter? This was the de Broglie hypothesis. This is the experiment which is given in most of the texts that we teach. Several questions cropped up. What is it, particle or wave? What about earlier results? So we do teach still, but if you look at a modern quantum mechanics book, it doesn't talk of this dual nature and things like that. So we will not talk of this. So the approach that we will follow is, what is a good theory? It need not tell you whether an electron is a wave or a particle. If you do an experiment, it should tell you whether it will behave as a wave or a particle. And what we will do is, we will represent the electron by a state vector psi, for which you have just finished the mathematics course. So we will use that language. Now what I want to show you is that if we use that language by means of some experiment, then those experiments can be explained by using the language which Professor Mukunda taught you in this week. So let me formulate the new theory through some experiments. We will do, this was the, one of the most seminal experiments ever done by mankind, I would say, and it changed the whole thing. And then through analogy with mathematics of light, I would try to motivate you that if we use the language of linear algebra, everything can be explained. And the first time when I had learned it as a student, but when I started teaching it, then I realized that the two, they fit so nicely with each other that it was very, it sent jitters down my spine, that you have a language of mathematics which is fitting into a physical phenomena so beautifully that you start at least believing in God. So Feynman's, and then I will talk of Feynman double slit experiment and explain all the three perplexing observations that I mentioned there. So the experiment was that you had a oval containing silver atoms, and then you collimate it so that they move along a line. You have an homogeneous magnetic field over here, and then there was this silver screen, and classically what you would expect would be this. We will come to why you expect this is because there is no direction in space defined here. So, but what you got was two blobs. So why do you expect, classically why would you expect the screen to be uniformly illuminated? Because this is this thing that the silver atom has 47 electrons, where 46 form of symmetrical electron cloud with no net angular momentum. So if we neglect the nuclear spin, then the last atom has angular momentum solely due to the intrinsic spin of the 47th electron. And if you have this thing, then you have a magnetic moment associated with it. The energy in the magnetic field is this, and the force is given by this. So if you have mu z less than this, the atom experiences an upward force, and vice versa. So beam will split. The point to carry home, apart from this, we don't need it for what we are going to talk about. What we is that it will split according to the value of this quantity mu z over here. And the other point too is that you don't have any direction in space defined here, so you expect mu in, if you had mu in a particular direction, it would violate the isotropicity of space. So one can say that it is an apparatus which measures the z component of mu. If atoms are randomly oriented, there is no preferred direction for orientation of mu. Classically spinning object mu z will take all possible values from plus mu to minus mu. Experimentally what we observe is two blobs, distinct. Original silver beam, it has split into two distinct components. There is this experiment was earlier, there was this question as to people were wondering when Bohr wrote down his hydrogen atom as to from where the quantization, angular momentum quantization. So there was a lot of talk about quantization of space. This is not as we understand it today, but there is a very interesting article that I have it here. I will leave it for you. It is that initially they didn't get anything out of this, and then I think Stern was one who used to smoke cigar, and he was smoking the cigar on the silver screen, and then because of silver sulfide form, there were two peaks that suddenly cropped up. There is a nice article in Physics Today. So what have we learned from the experiment? Two possible values of the z component of S are observed. One is on the up component and one is the down. We will refer to them as Sz plus and Sz minus. They happen to be multiples of some fundamental constants. It turns out to be h cross by 2. Spin is quantized, which we will not anyway we need, and nothing is sacred about the z direction. It is just that the magnetic field was oriented in the z direction, so you get this. But if the magnetic field was in the x direction, you would have gotten two blobs in the x direction. So what we will do for this was just the explanation, so that but what we will represent is the Stern-Gerlach apparatus by a box like this. And this hat z hat tells you that the magnetic field is in the z direction. So these are my thought experiments. I have a source, and I have a Stern-Gerlach experiment in the with a inhomogeneous magnetic field in the z direction, and I observe two blobs. And now I block one of the blobs, and now no matter how many different Stern-Gerlach experiments I put along the z direction, I only get one blob. I can go on putting these blobs, and this is not a statement, it's not a trivial statement that I am making. I will connect it to the mathematics that has been done in the past week. But no matter how many different Stern-Gerlach apparatus I put, I will only get this Sz plus, which is what I am calling. So now this is what I said, they were oriented in all possible directions. One way to understand this would be that the Stern-Gerlach apparatus, which is a measuring device, put these atoms which were in all possible states, and we agreed that there was no Z magnetic field in that direction. So, in one of the two states specific to that apparatus. It has, mu was oriented in all possible direction and hence mu Z could take all possible this thing. This apparatus measured mu Z and it put it in two states which are specific to this apparatus. So there is often this question of, quantum mechanics always deals with microscopic objects like electrons when they interact with the macroscopic world. The apparatus is the macroscopic world and the electrons in the silver atom are there. And the result is that this thing was that they put it into this thing. Once the Stern-Gerlach apparatus put it in one of the states, repeated measurement of the same. So we said I can turn around the argument, I can say that the Stern-Gerlach apparatus measures the Z component of the spin. Okay, now I can speak this thing, and the repeated measurement of this spin along the Z direction did not disturb the system. So I do another thought experiment, and now I say, well, Z is not particular, so I put a Stern-Gerlach apparatus in the X direction. Now, after I block this beam, there is another block, and now we have the inhomogeneous magnetic field in the X direction. And I get my two blobs in corresponding to Sx plus and Sx minus. So when you demonstrate an experiment to the student, you make an inference, and what inference I would derive from it? Does it mean that 50% of the atoms in the Sz plus beam come out of the first apparatus are made of atoms characterized by Sx plus and 50% of the time by Sx minus? Right? This will be my inference from this theory. So I can again test it. I put another. So I want to test this. So I put a Stern-Gerlach apparatus in the again a homogeneous magnetic field in the Z direction. But we observe that from the final SGZ there are two beams emerging. There is no way to explain this because I had blocked this over here. So how did I get back those two? Only conclusion we can draw, or if I want to be consistent, is that this measurement, or when the macroscopic world interacted with the quantum system, it disturbed the system again. But sometimes in the earlier slide, in this case, it did not disturb the system. So we have to, and in this case, it did. So the second measurement put the system in the states. The way to, if I would have to explain consistently, I would say the second measurement put the system in states specific to it. The third measurement, which was different from the second, again put it in the state specific to it. So when I made this measurement, it put in the states which were specific to it, which were Sz plus and Sz minus. Now when I make the second measurement, it puts it in the states specific to this, which are Sx plus and Sx minus. And the third measurement again puts it that. So there are obviously the way it interacts with the world or these apparatus there is particular to the apparatus with which it interacts. So what are the conclusions? Well, measurements disturb quantum system in an essential way. The boxes are nothing but measurements. And measurement puts the quantum system in one of the special states. Any further measurement of the same variable does not change the state of the system. Measurement of another variable may disturb the system and put it in one of its special states. So when you now we can, since you have had a course and you already teach, if you have, you know that if I represent these measurements by an operator, and if I represent the state of the system, I'm not used to writing whiteboard. If I make a state of the system by a vector, and if this is an eigenstate of this operator, then I do get back this state with some constant, and this must have been done earlier, and this thing, and in general, if I make a measurement of some system and with an operator, I can represent it through mathematics. This would not give me back this psi. So only some special states give you back this. So just keep this in mind. We'll come back to this. Is what we are hinting. So this is a complete departure from classical physics. Measurement of Sx destroys any information about Sz. So quantum theory is a theory of measurement. We can never measure, and you can talk of only measurement of what you have measured. We can never measure Sx and Sz together. So we will come to it when we discuss the postulates. These are known as, how is it a complete departure from classical physics? Because if you measure, you know that if I want to measure the angular momentum of a spinning top, it must have been done also by Professor Mani, then I have no difficulty. I can find omega x, omega y, omega z, and I have no difficulty in specifying Lx, Ly, and z. So this experiment has no classical analog. So now let's consider an analogy which I use to. Is it too fast, or you can interrupt me anytime actually, because when it's on the transparency, then it is, but I thought it wastes a lot of time in drawing those graphs, so that's why it is on the.
You could go a little slower.
It's okay. You can stop me. So from here I'll go a little slower. So now I want to, these are all just facts or experimental observation. Now I would like to, use the language of, let me tell you the motivation of this, is I will like to use the language of linear algebra to formulate the theory of quantum mechanics. And this is just, the analogy is here just to show you that it can be done. So I have listed some experiments which had no classical analog. Now I am listing something which we know from our knowledge of classical physics, and then I connect the two, and then we use this language that you have learned in the last week to explain something in quantum mechanics for quantum systems. So if I consider a monochromatic light which is propagating in z direction and it is polarized in the x direction, this is my vector equation. I should have put an arrow over there. And similarly, a linearly polarized light in the y direction is this. A filter which polarizes light in the x direction is called an x filter, and one which polarizes light in y direction is called a y filter. Okay. If I can, and x filter becomes a y filter when I rotate it. There is no x and y. The nature doesn't give that. We do it. So I do an experiment with light. I have a source, and I have an x filter and a y filter. And this light, so if I had a light which was propagating in the z direction, finally I will not get any light. Now I do another experiment, and I have now a filter in the x prime and the y prime direction. These are my x and y prime is defined by a rotation of about 45 degrees about in the xy plane. So now I have an x prime filter here, and this should be x filter. Then I have an x prime filter and a y prime filter. So if I do this experiment, I will get light. So just by addition of an x prime filter over here, please excuse me for this, this should be x filter, I get light. The selection of the x prime filter destroyed the information about the previous state of polarization. Now notice I am trying to speak the language quite analogous to the situation earlier with the Stern-Gerlach this thing. I can carry the analogy further. I can say that the Sz plus minus are x and y polarized light, and Sx plus minus are x prime and y prime polarized light. How do I explain this? Using polarization, I resolve this x prime filter along the two x y direction and y prime along this, and then I can explain that when I had this filter, it allowed the light to go into the x prime x direction. But when this x prime was filter was there, I can resolve it from this equation into x and y. I can reverse this and write E0x and E0y. So this allowed light to pass through. Now let us. So this is basically the mathematical equation for the 45 degrees, which is trivial. So mathematics of polarization in the triple filter arrangement. The first filter, an x polarized beam, linear combination of x prime y prime polarized beam, or x polarized beam, linear combination of this. So x prime this thing. So second filter selects the x prime polarized beam, but an x prime polarized beam is a linear combination of x and y. And the third filter therefore selects this. And then you have you could expand the light polarization in any direction in the xy plane by using these two set of vectors. Suppose now I want to describe the Stern-Gerlach apparatus. I could use two vectors Sz plus and Sz minus, and notice I am now using a hat on the side. Why am I doing that? Well, the cheapest answer would be that I want to distinguish it from what we have studied by putting a hat on top, that these are not, I will leave the concept that of vectors which I have learned since my childhood, that the vectors have magnitude and direction. Some idea of magnitude they will have, but we will leave the concept that the vectors have direction. So, and that is the more general or the mathematical definition is that they must transform from one this thing according to certain transformation law. Right? You know so then I can express Sx plus and Sx minus by 1 by root 2 Sz plus. 1 by root 2 is some number. It comes because we are adding up. I mean, we will talk about this a little later when we talk of in quantum mechanics. We will see that this vector, and if I multiply it with a constant, they are the same. They represent the same quantum system essentially. There is no way to distinguish a factor here. Of course, so because these are normalized vectors, if Sz plus and Sz minus, if I add 2 may have been done in your maths class, then I need a factor of 1 by root 2 over here. But the only point to make is that I can express Sx minus and Sx plus just by linear combination. And nothing, so now the next point is that nothing is stated about the z or the x direction. So what about the y direction? They have to be independent of Sx plus and Sx minus. Now basis is of two vectors. How can I describe this? So let me take the analogy further, and I now talk of circularly polarized light. When we pass it through an x filter, only x component will go through. When we pass it through y filter, only y component will go through. And circularly polarized light is, what way is it different from linearly polarized light? That the y polarized component is 90 degrees out of phase with the x component. So if, based on my previous equation, if I want to write down the vector equation for the electric field, I have a pi by 2 factor over here. I can be a little more elegant and I can add a. So again, this is a sum of two vectors, and I add a imaginary this thing which has a phase of, which essentially adds a phase of pi by 2. How does it help? Now I can represent. We can represent Sy plus and Sy minus by putting a So using the linear combination of these two, but I have for the y I use that it is plus I. So we can describe now. I leave this as an exercise to you that if I define it this way, I can explain all the experiment that we did, the thought experiment with the Stern-Gerlach experiment. So we can, the moral of the story is that we can describe the Stern-Gerlach experiment using the language of vectors, and that is why the language of vectors you have already learned. However, there is no connection with ordinary vectors which we defined as magnitude and direction, and the vector space would be complex. The vectors or tensors, I stress again, they are neither real nor complex. So these are the constants that sit before the vector are either real or complex. If the constants are real, you say it's a linear, we will denote it by the quantity, a vector space in which they sit is, this is the dimensionality and this will come this thing, but this is a real field, and if they sit in a complex field, we will denote it by. We will, in the language, in the quantum mechanics that you have to teach, and these are what are called as C numbers, or they commute with each other. They are constants or scalars, so they commute with each other, and this is what we will talk of. We will limit it to that. So now let me present the other experiment, and I try to connect whatever we have talked of. And this is again, all of you must have gone to this. Let me connect it to the perplexing observations. And so, what he says, this is a good chapter to motivate, the students. And things on a very small scale behave like nothing. We have direct experience. Even the experts do not understand it the way they would like to. There are various open issues with quantum systems. Quantum mechanics is not still understood. Maybe towards the end of the fifth lecture, I will point out where you cannot have, or you cannot still do with whatever we know. They act in a sort of abstract or imaginative fashion, and not by connection with our direct experience. So let me examine one phenomena we have seen, which let's examine another one which contains the essentials of quantum mechanics, contains the only mystery, and the mystery will not go away. We will just be able to explain how it works. So this is the thought experiment with bullet. You have all read about it. You have a gun which sprays bullet, and where I thought my view of why Feynman put it over here is there are two points he wanted to make from it. One, though he doesn't say it explicitly, but this is a classical system. One is that you are speaking the language of probability. The experiment is that this is a gun which is fairly arbitrary, so it's spraying the bullet all over the armor plate, and you have a backstop and you have a detector which collects bullet, and so you are never sure whether the bullet will go through this or through that. So the language of probability is, we do speak for classical systems also. And the second point that he wants to make is that because the bullets are particles in the classical sense, so they arrive in lumps. Lumps means that either you observe one whole bullet, you never observe half a bullet. So you can make a statement that the bullet passes either through hole 1 or through hole 2. Speaking the language of classical physics, if they are in a definite state, I know that it has either passed through hole 1 or through hole 2, or the state of the bullet is defined. So if I move this detector all over the place, and if both the holes are open, if only one hole, let's say hole 1 is open and hole 2 I close, I get a curve, something like the distribution of the bullet on the screen is something like P1. If hole 2 is open, I get P2, and if both the holes are open, I get P12, which is just the sum of probability that the bullet passes through hole 1 and the probability through bullet passes through hole 2. So we speak of probability can measure the number, counting the number of which arrive within a certain time. The ratio of this number to the total number of bullets is what is called as probability. So bullets arrive in lump, one whole bullet, probability as P12, because bullets may have come either from hole 1 or hole 2. P1 is the probability with only hole 1 open, P2 is open, and the probabilities are adding up. That's the third point that he said he wants to probably make in this. Now I do a similar experiment with water waves, and you have a source which you jiggle over here, and the waves pass through these two holes, and then you have a detector over here. It's a gadget which measures the intensity of wave motion, and you can move around and measure. So when hole 1 is open, you get a curve I1, which is the intensity. When curve 2 is when hole 2 is open, then you get I2. But when both the holes are open, you don't get I1 plus I2, but you get a curve like this. So intensities can have any values. There is no lumpiness in the intensity. We measure the wave intensity for various values of x, and we get I12. And we understand this, that the original wave is diffracted at the two holes. So new circular waves spread out, interfering and giving us the pattern I12. I1 is the intensity of wave with hole 1 open, hole 2 closed, and this. So the intensity I12 is certainly not the sum of I12. We say that there is interference of two waves. At some place where the waves are in phase, the wave peaks add together to give a large amplitude. There is constructive interference which correspond to large values of I12. At certain other place, you have phase difference of pi, and they interfere destructively, and you get low values of I12. And there is a quantitative relation between I1, I2, H12. If I represent the wave by H1 EI omega 2 and this by H2 EI omega 2, the mathematics is again very simple. If hole 1 is open, then I get intensity H1 squared. If hole 2 is open, then I get intensity H2 whole squared. If both the holes are open, then it is not the intensities or the probabilities which are adding up, but what is adding up are not the intensities, but the amplitudes which are adding up. So in some cases, when it was bullet, it was the intensity or the probability which was adding up. In this case, it is the amplitudes which add up. So that is the point. Now he does the same experiment with electron, and instead of an ordinary gun, you have an electron gun, and the electrons pass through both the slits, and you have a detector. You could have a Geiger counter.
Excuse me, that probability adding up means what exactly physically it means?
We will come to it when we talk of, actually I have not yet formulated the postulates of quantum physics. These are statements that I am making, which I will correct when I talk of postulates in the next lecture. But basically it is just that, it is, you cannot speak of, you can only speak of that, what is the, you are not certain that the electrons will add up, will pass through hole 1 or through hole 2. You can only talk of that there is a certain probability of it passing up through hole 1, which is represented by this curve over here. And there is a certain probability of this, and that when both the holes are open, they add up. And in this case, in the next case, it's not that the intensities are adding up.
So in the first case, probability was number of bullets divided by number of bullets, right?
Yeah. Okay. This was the question. From there I have written the ratio of the number to the total number of bullets detected is called the probability of that curve P1 or P2.
In the second case, it is intensity.
In the second case, this is the intensity, and this is different from the. We are representing the wave by this complex number H1, this thing, and what is adding up. If only hole 1 is open, then you have this mod squared or H1 squared. Do you see the link between the earlier? But if both the holes are open, then it is not H1 squared plus H2 squared, which should have been the case, but it is H1 plus H2 mod of H1 plus H2. So this is the reason why you get interference, because there is a phase difference between this, and this results in, if the amplitudes add, intensity can have any value. That is another point that is made, that if the amplitudes add, then the intensity is not I1 plus I2, but it can have any values, also 0 that we see in the experiment over there. So now he does the same experiment with the electrons, except that he has any other questions? So we have an electron gun or a tungsten wire, and which we heat, and then you have two holes here, and then you have a movable detector. If I close hole 2, then I get the probability is, again I plot total number of electrons emitted upon the collected over here at a particular place, and I get a curve P1. If hole 1 is closed, I hold 2, and if both the holes are open, I do not get P1 plus P2, which was I was observing with the electron gun, but I get something like this. Again, here the amplitudes are adding up. What is the problem with this? The problem is that we hear clicks from the detector. All clicks are same. There are no half clicks. What does he mean by this? And the clicks come erratically. They are statistical process. By saying that all the clicks are same means that they are coming. They are all identical, and they are so. This is a property of that all the electrons are identical, and that they arrive in lump. You don't hear half a click. So you either get a click, that means the electron is there, or not there. It's not spread over in space. And if you can put two separate detectors, and if you throw at a reasonable interval or not everything together, then only one of the detectors will click. It is never that that you will have signal in. So if I place here 2, they both will not click at the same time, only one will click.
Sir,
Yes.
that detectors are moving along y-axis.
It's some thought experiment, that is why we will come to the actual experiment also. This is just to, you can basically want to, you move this detector to collect what is the number of electrons which arrive over here, or something. Nowadays we build a detector in which we can measure all the number of electrons arriving at each position simultaneously. So I am just reducing this. As far as the detector is concerned, we already have the technology that we can measure that these many electrons will arrive here this at every. But just reducing what is given in final 1D. So what is the relative probability that an electron lump will arrive at a distance x from the center is what we have plotted, and this is the interesting curve P12. Why is it interesting? Because it is behaving like. So now let me point out what is the problem. Since they come in lumps like the bullets, so I can say electron has either come through hole 1 or hole 2. Like the bullet, I said it either comes through hole 1 or hole 2. Since they arrive in lumps mean that one single electron arrives, it's never half or 3/4. So I can say electron has either come through hole 1 or hole 2. Assuming the above electrons can be divided in two classes, those that come through hole 1, those that come through hole 2, with both the holes open, the effect should be sum of effects of one hole open. If they either go through hole 1 or through hole 2, why if both the holes are open, then I should have, when both the holes are open, I should get the sum should be with one of the holes open. The result P12 with both holes open is clearly not the sum of P1 plus P2. In analogy with water waves, we say there is interference. How is it possible? Because electrons either go through hole 1 or to hole 2 is not correct. They split in half, but no, they arrived in lumps. So it's not possible. So thus, then he says that they went through complicated path, hole 1, then they went around and went through hole 2. So we test this. So there are some points that have very few electrons when both the holes are open, but which receive many more when we close one hole. So it's a real mystery, because how did the electron in this over here know whether, because the path is, if you assume a classical physics path, then the path here from here is decided, but the electron when it started moving from here knew very well whether both the holes are open or not. Otherwise, how can it happen that I've just drawn this like this, is that when only one hole is open, this is the maximum, but when both the holes are open, this is the minimum. So one possibility would be that it already knew, and when the electron is starting from here, how did it know whether both the holes are open or not? So this is again what he points out is a departure. This is the mystery, and normally I have found when this works well. On the other hand, at the center of the pattern, P12 is more than twice as large as P1 plus P2. So what is happening? If you close one hole, you have decreased the probability through the other also. Thus closing, I have decreased the probability of the other. So it's as if the other hole is controlling what goes through the first hole. Very mysterious, yet the mathematics is very simple. For P12 is quite similar to I12. Mathematically, I can represent them by two vectors and take a modular square, then I get the how many electrons will come at this thing. So the electron arrives in lumps like particles, and the probability of arrival of this lump is distributed like the distribution of intensity of wave. This is what he makes. It is in this sense that electron behaves like particles as well as waves. For classical physics, intensity was defined as a mean over time of the square of the wave amplitude, and we used complex numbers as mathematical trick to simplify analysis. To quantum mechanics, again, we must use complex numbers. Finally, since the number of electrons that arrive at a point is not the sum of the electrons that go through 1 and 2, hence the proposition that electrons go through either hole 1 or hole 2 is false. To make sense out of this experiment, therefore, we must say that this proposition that electrons, we made this proposition that they arrive in lumps, but if the intensity is distributed according to like water waves, then I must say what would be one of the inference from the experiment, that this proposition that they go either through hole 1 or hole 2 is false. So what he does, what he suggests then is that, okay, let me measure through which hole the electron go. So he shines a laser over here, and I know that when you have when electron or an electric charge interacts with light, it scatters light. So I will know if the light is scattered over here, I will know that the electron is passed through hole 1. If it gets scattered to hole 2, if I see a flash over here, then I know that it has passed to this. So now when I do the experiment, every time you hear a click or the electron reaches here, I see a flash which is either near hole 1 or near hole 2. And I never see a flash which is simultaneously at both the points. So experimentally then the proposition that the electron goes through either hole 1 or hole 2 is correct. Because here when I allow that, I will only see these flashes. Keep track of whether we saw the flash near hole 1 or hole 2. Now when we add these things, P1 is the probability of electron going through hole 1, P2 is the probability of going through hole 2, and P12 prime when I am observing the electron through which hole it goes, then the probabilities add. So, watching the electrons, when we look at the electron, the distribution on the screen is different, then we do not know. So, we turn off the light source and P12 prime then becomes identical to P12. As soon as we switch off the laser or whatever it is, the interference pattern returns. Turning on the light source disturbs the electron. We know from Compton effect that light does give a jolt to the photoelectron. So I turn down the brightness. Now what happens is, sometimes we hear the click but do not see the flash. Flashes are always on the same side. Light is also like electron. Electron were not seen when the photon was around. It was not present, so you did not see it. So if I now make 3 columns, flash near hole 1, flash near hole 2, and click 3 clicks heard but no flash. The one where you do not see the flash shows interference.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
This experiment you do exactly as this.
This experiment has been done, I will come now.
Just put the entire experiment in a black box. That is, let the flashes be there, but you don't observe them.
Yeah.
Then what will be the pattern on the screen?
Then I don't think you will get the interference pattern.
So understand what I am saying?
I think because I will come to this. I will come to your question. Just wait, then we can discuss. It's an interesting question. I have not thought of it. But let me answer this in this manner, and then I will justify it in a short time. Let me just complete. So those near hole 1 have a probability P1 prime. Those near hole 2 have P2 prime. Those in column 3 show the interference pattern. If the electrons are not seen, we observe interference pattern. When we see a photon disturbs it, and if we don't, the photon does not disturb it. So reduce the momentum, increase the wavelength. So I know that from the Compton effect, lambda prime minus lambda is this. So instead of reducing, I reduce the momentum by increasing the wavelength. So, and I have the Raleigh's criteria that 2 objects can be resolved if the distance between them is of the order of lambda by 2. If we go on increasing the wavelength, there will come a time when you will see a broad flash, but you will not be able to tell through which hole the electron passes. And it is that time that the interference pattern returns. So now let me, before I try to answer the question that was posed. So he states the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. He could have stated it using the Stern-Gerlach apparatus. He says it is impossible to arrange light in such a way that one can tell through which hole the electron passed and still see the interference pattern. And he also makes the new laws of nature that we are saying would only be consistent if there was a basic limitation on our experimental capabilities not previously recognized. And he says complete theory of quantum mechanics rests on this principle. What about the proposition that electrons go through either hole 1 or hole 2? If one has a piece of apparatus which is capable of determining through which hole the electron went, then one can say it went through either hole 1 or hole 2. When in the apparatus there is nothing to disturb the electron, then we may not say that electron goes through either hole 1 or hole 2. This is the logical tightrope we must walk to describe the nature successfully. So what have we learned? Because we need it for the next lecture, the probability of an event in an ideal experiment is given by the square of the absolute value of complex number phi, which is called the probability amplitude. And P is the probability, phi is the probability amplitude, and P is phi squared, modulo phi squared. When an event can occur in several alternative ways, then the probability amplitude for the event is the sum of the probability amplitude of each of the ways in which it can occur. If the experiment determines which alternative is taken, then the probabilities add, the interference is lost. Some thoughts is that the Young's double slit experiment was carried out in 1800. In the double slit experiment, when we allow just one electron, or in that case even a one photon to pass through the slits, both open, we consider the probability function of the electron and say that this probability function splits up into two and after passing through the slit reinforce. That is to say that the electron passed through both slits simultaneously, provided that no one is observing. So in 1909, this experiment was done with a Fieldless light source equivalent to a candle burning at a distance slightly exceeding a mile, and it would lead to interference fringes. And this led Dirac to the statement that each photon then interferes only with itself. So this is the issue of, this has also been used, I work in experimental high energy nuclear physics. We use this technique. This is what is called as, you might have heard of, quantum entanglement. And this technique was discovered in astronomy. This is called the Hans-Brown-Twiss interferometry. You don't know which state is coming from, so you have a star and you try to observe the photons coming from here, and because you don't know from, and you have two detectors over here, you don't know whether the photon came from here or the photon came from here, and this allows you to estimate the size of the star. In quantum computing, this is used, this is called as entanglement because the photon is simultaneously in both the states. So now to the Copenhagen interpretation posits the existence of, there are two interpretations, we will come to it, existence which describe the likelihood of finding the particle at a given location. Until the particle is detected at any location along this probability wave, it effectively exists at every point. Thus, when the particle could be passing through either of the two slits, it will actually pass through both. So an interference pattern results. But if the particle is detected at one of the two slits, then it can no longer be passing through both. Its presence then becomes manifested at one or the other, and so interferences. And now, why I said it will not show interference pattern is this is similar to what Feynman then said, is that if I cannot make a statement that the electron passes either through hole or one or two hole two, then there is another formulation of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, which is the path integral formulation, which says that you have to, there are all possible paths that the electron can take, quantum system can, from here to there. And through space, so then the electron takes every possible path through space-time to get from point A to point B. When you restrict, when you make a measurement, then you have to integrate over all possible paths that the electron can take.
No, but in this case, the photon has anyway interacted with the electron. It's just that you have not observed it.
Yeah, so then the path of the electron gets fixed.
Yeah, but
So then
so
you.
would you say measurement has been made in spite of the fact that you have no knowledge about that measurement?
Yeah, my knowledge doesn't matter, but why is this interference being possible? Because I cannot define through which, am I?
No, I lost track of what you were
What he was asking was that if I put that whole apparatus, including the laser, in a box and I don't observe, will the interference still come or not?
Okay, now the original thing,
Yeah.
what I thought was it's all electronic. What you mean by observe is
Yeah.
that if there is a signal which comes from one of the slits, that automatically eliminates in my count,
Yeah.
right? So whether I put it in a black box, I presume you are suggesting that electronic blocking should be removed, right? Let me repeat it. I have slit 1 and slit 2, and then I send a laser beam,
Yes.
and I decide whether it is coming through slit 1 or slit 2, or it doesn't interact at all. If it comes through slit 1, electronically I will know it has come through slit 1, and I will tell my counter to put it on the multi-channel of it being observed in slit 1.
Counterpart is removed.
Right. So, whether I remove it or not, I will keep track of whether it went through slit 1 or slit 2 or it did not go. So, I will have 3 different counts. One which went through slit 1, and one which went through slit 2, and one for which I have no information. What you were saying is the one which had no information is the one which will show the interference pattern. Okay? So, Now, what you are suggesting is that I will let the laser beam interact and not do this electronic check. Okay. If I do that, the way I understand it, now there is always a certain probability. Now let us think in terms of probability amplitude. The laser beam has a finite probability of scattering the electron. Once the electron is scattered out of the system, then it will not give an interference pattern. So the ones which the two electrons, the electrons was not absorbed on, they were not scattered by the light beam, and they will have the coherence effect, and therefore you will see the interference pattern of that. So there will be a noise over and above which there will be an interference pattern. That's all.
But if you don't observe it, that doesn't make a difference.
No, I have not observed it now. Except that by putting in the light beam, I have destroyed a certain amount of coherence of the electron.
Which
Which is
anyway
the
he was doing.
yes, but then in counting, he kept track of only the coherent part. Okay? Now he has not kept track of the coherent part, which will mean it will just add as an extra noise level. That is, the count which he did was the only ones for which I had no information whether it passed through 1 and 2. And now they are there, plus they are there the ones in which it has gone through slit 1, and I have also known it has gone through slit 2.
Can you just keep this simple lessons of electronic counters and let us say, as he said, we are going to observe those flashes with our eyes and keep a count in our head. It's just that now I am blind.
No, it is not a question of you are keeping. You should know which electron, that is the count which is the one for the electron which passed. I did not get a count and it went and hit the screen. So I know there is a correlation there, as I understand.
I would like to answer that one way, the only way to explain this is that the electron takes all possible paths. Once you shine a laser light, then the path of the electron gets fixed. It has either gone through hole 1 or through hole 2. And then it should not show the interference pattern. That is why I answered this. The way, whether you observe it or not, I don't think it should make a difference. Because you have fixed. The interference pattern, one way to look at it is because it takes all possible paths. And this is the, basically in the classical physics course, you find the principle of least action. There is a path which is followed, or there is and this is the way you can also explain. You know, there was this question of why you have an electron, the Bohr's model, and it is revolving around the. Yeah.
That is, if the light beam hits the electron,
Yeah.
then the coherence effects which are required for it to go through is destroyed. I don't need this pathetical formation.
I am not talking of, I am saying that the result of this experiment is that I have to leave this notion that electron goes through either hole 1 or to hole 2. Therefore, it can take all possible paths through which it can take. Once I shine the laser, whether I observe it or not, I have decided the path for it.
So as far as that experiment is concerned, just shining the laser constitutes a measurement and collapse of the waveforms.
Yeah. Basically, this is the interference.
It is not a one to see. It will be a background. There are thousands of electrons which are coming. For each electron, there is a probability that the scattering. So there is also a probability light will not scatter. So those coherent effect will continue. So in the origin, the way one would say is there is a certain level of coherence when you want to. That level of coherence will decrease when I shine a light. I will produce an environment where decoherence can increase.
If we assume ideal case that you can observe everything, and still if you keep in black box, I would say because you have destroyed the entanglement or you have put the electron in a fixed state, therefore you no longer can add the amplitudes, you will have to add the psi star psi or modular psi square. So then the interference pattern gets destroyed. The interference is that the electron is simultaneously existing in both the states. Or you have so if once you shine the laser through this, then you have already decided the I mean, basically, then the electron has to, this path is fixed, and then you destroy the interference. When a detector is placed, this is just the way of saying. One more glass. Okay. The last one was actually there were no, this I missed actually. This was there was one electron at one time and done an actual experiment by Konomura at Hitachi, when they observed an interference pattern. The transparency is over, so then we have to go to postulates and then I have to. So yeah. If there are questions or things because I went fast or something is not clear, then let me stop here. No. Huh? Was it clear or?
You said there are two kinds of interpretation.
Yeah, Heisenberg and Schrodinger. We will come to this actually. For this I need to, one is, basically related to either you do something on the wave function when you interpret it or you do something on the operator. So let me first formulate this. But basically the bottom line is that you have a quantum system which I am representing by the state vector or a vector, and you have a macroscopic world which I am representing by an operator. When these two interact, I can either change the state vector or I can change the operator. The two are equivalent. I mean, there are two sides of the same coin. One we call as the Heisenberg representation, one we call as the Schrodinger representation.
You will be talking about quantum entanglement also in your session.
There is no time. Actually, there is lot of. We work on this, which is called the when we collide two ions, two heavy ions. Then we want to a fireball is produced. You put in a lot of energy density, and then you try to estimate the source size by this principle only.
Have you established it actually experimenting quantum entanglement?
No. Well, this is this thing of photon existing in two states is in an entangled state. That is all. But these are techniques which are used in the Hans-Brownquist interferometry to determine the size of the star. This is used in the heavy ion collisions to determine what is the size of the source actually. This thing you can have if you have two detectors which are kept separated and you don't know whether the ion is coming or some particle is coming from one end of the source or the other. It gives you an idea of what the source size is. It works on this and very reasonable estimate. But this is more basic course, so what we are talking about. But there were other questions which are there which I have not touched. Is that are there some hidden variables which are very you presented the no, it's not. There are some very interesting questions about whether there are some hidden variables that are not obvious to us. But there is a certain amount in 5 lectures, so one can prove that there are this thing which goes by the name of Bell's inequality, which are very interesting. But there is no time for that.
There is also one very nice article by Anu Venugopalan in Resonance on this work of Akira Tonomi.
I have the original paper also, so I will leave it here. if you want to have a look, both the physics today and the other emission I have brought. This is the American Journal of Physics, how they observed the single electron build-up by of an interference pattern. There was one single electron at any time in the apparatus, and they got the interference pattern. Thank you.
Hello, अजून participant? Ready? Yeah. One more. अजून मागे दोन.
Wait, please. Wait.